Hey guys, this is Ryan with Seek Outside, and today I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on starting a fire in your wood stove and your hot tent. With starting a fire in a hot tent, these wood stoves are a little bit different than some of the other ways that you'd start a fire, just because you don't have any open air exposure here, so there's going to be, you got to play with the draws a little bit more. The other thing with it is, most of the time when you're trying to start a fire in one of these things, the conditions outside are not ideal. A lot of times there's moisture on the ground. Some of the wood that you have is maybe wet. So that's what we're going to kind of go over today, some of the good fire starters, some of the stuff we don't recommend. So let's get into it. Let's start with fire starters first. With these titanium wood stoves, you generally want to stay away from the fire starters that have a lot of chemicals that put off a lot of residue. The reason is we have this spark arrestor here, and the holes are a little bit smaller, so what can happen is you can get a bunch of residue building up in here. It can really reduce the airflow going through this firebox here, which will, diminish your burn time. So I got a couple ones here that I would recommend. The first one here, this is called tumbleweed, and this is actually my favorite one, just because this is it breaks apart real easily, but it's got just enough of a wax coating on the outside, not a ton, but just enough to where this little bundle right here will burn for 10-15 minutes while you get your fire going. The other one that I have right here is, these are basically, this comes from a Presto log, which is basically a bunch of compressed sawdust that is encased in a little wax, and you can actually break these apart. These are actually nice if you're like camping in your truck. You can just bring a whole thing of these, and because this flammable material is compressed so much, it will get a better burn time than some of the wood that you have access to out there. The last one, this is probably my least favorite, but I've tried it before. The reason I like it is because it doesn't really have any residue at all. It's basically just pellets, wood pellets, and this weird like sawdust mush stuff. But it's just instant fire. It does all right. The problem with this stuff is when it gets moist, it basically is rendered useless, but it's not going to put off any residue in your stove. Your natural fire starters for a titanium wood stove in a hot tent are going to be generally the same as you would use just starting a regular old fire. The reason I prefer to always have some sort of backup fire starter is because, come October, November, even into the winter, most of this dry grass and these little sticks that you would break off for kindling are going to be wet, so they're going to be not as easy to start a fire with. The last thing that you're going to need to start your fire is some sort of lighter, obviously. The thing that I like the most, this is a game changer. So this is just a butane torch. Now, these are heavy. However, the reason I like this is because in a jam, if you can't get a fire started any other way, if all the wood is wet, this will start a fire for you. You just lay this on your smaller pieces of drier wood. It will get the fire up and rolling. So I like having a butane torch, but of course, as always, the classic Bic lighter is a go-to. Problem with these butane torch lighters is they do run out of fuel more often. So, if you're going on a backcountry trip, maybe bringing an extra fuel canister is not necessarily the best way to do it. And I will say, there was one time I was in a pinch, I actually used my MSR wind burner and put it in there to start the fire. It worked. I wouldn't recommend it, probably very dangerous, but in a pinch, you can always roll that way. So once you have all your tools selected, let's dive into starting your fire in your hot tent in the stove. So to start off, I want to give you guys a hot tip. When you're running a hot tent, one of the big activities that nobody really talks about if you read forums on the internet is wood curation, but it's super important, especially for getting these fires going right away. Especially in circumstances like I mentioned earlier where, the ground is wet, maybe all the wood is wet around you. You can dry that wood out pretty easily just by having it in the tent here next to the stove. So kind of the way I think about it is I'm always trying to get my wood, like I'm cutting wood right now to be able to use either tonight or tomorrow, because that 24 hours or even just 12 hours is going to be enough time to dry some of this stuff out. So as you can see here, I got a bunch of different sizes of sticks ranging from, and this is all just cedar wood, so it's not the best, but I got kindling, smaller kindling, all the way up to the bigger logs. that I can fit in here that are gonna keep this fire going a little bit longer. But to start off, you always want to make sure that your 2 dampers are all the way open. So this right here is going to be your intake damper. And then on a seek outside stove, this little dog tag that slides into your chimney, that's going to be your outtake damper. To start this fire, you really want to make sure that both of these are open. The thing with titanium stoves, this titanium will heat up very quickly. Now, that is a great thing for starting a fire, because what that does is it creates a draw. It creates pull from the colder air out here going up through the hot pipe. And that's going to provide that airflow to really keep this fire going. But you're not going to have that at the start. So I just want to go over kind of how I like to start fires within the seek outside stove here. Usually what I do is I'm just going to peel off a little bit of this here tumbleweed. And then we're lucky enough in these circumstances to have some dry grass and dry sticks. So what I do is I like to put these in the very back. Now, the reason why you want to put this in the very back is because, again, you're going to get that draft flowing through there. And that's going to be important for getting this fire going quickly and keeping the fire going. So I'll just put a little kindling, and it's a little difficult to create the standard triangle or teepee method back here because you don't have a whole lot of room to work with, but I kind of like to build like a little Lincoln log shelter back there with my dry stuff down at the bottom, and that's going to just create enough surface area to kind of get some of that kindling going. I'm also going to put one of these sawdust pucks back there as kind of a fail-safe to keep this thing going. I also like to have just like some of my smaller sticks just kind of in there on the side here to get them drying out, but then once this fire catches, hopefully those things will go as well. So now, as you can see there, that butane torch really did work. It got everything rolling right away with minimal. It's not like you have to sit there with a Bic lighter hitting 4 different spots. You just torch it one time and you got this thing up and rolling. So the key here is not to rush it too much. Just kind of make sure that all those smaller sticks are getting going, and eventually, especially if it's dark in here, you'll start to see this stove pipe getting red hot. And that's when you know you got a good draw coming through here. But we're not quite there yet, so with this thing rolling, I'm gonna put one of my bigger pieces here just to get some more air flowing through here, especially if you're having trouble getting this fire going, which we're not right now. It's rolling pretty well, but if you do, what I like to do is actually close this thing a good amount, and this is gonna automatically kind of help the draw. But if you can just kind of just lightly blow in there, you can hear that thing rolling, and it kind of directs your airflow a little bit more towards the fire instead of having this thing open. I've just found that to work a little bit better. Gets that thing going, and it keeps smoke from rolling back out and into the shelter here. As you can see here, you can see those flames going straight up through that chimney. They're going straight up, which is a good thing. You know, if you were to start this fire closer, you might not have that, and you might have a little bit more of an issue getting this thing rolling to where it is right now. So you can kind of see in here that the flames are dying down a little bit. We might be getting to kind of the wet core of some of this wood. So anytime you see this, before you got a good enough bed of coals, just give it more airflow, and it helps. So as you can hear, we kind of got this thing rolling now. I think we got a good enough bed of coals that it's basically just maintenance now, just adding wood Couple things you can do to kind of manage the heat that this thing is putting off and how fast your wood is burning is just messing with these intake dampers. So this intake damper here, to me, this one has the most, I don't know, it does the most in terms of controlling your fire. But then we also have the outtake damper here. I tend to use this one more so for just killing this fire, cutting off all the oxygen. The thing you got to be careful with here is, depending on what kind of wood you're using, if you have this closed all the way, it can keep the smoke down in here and not allow it to escape out the chimney. So if your tent is smoking up, always make sure to check that. But yeah, guys, that's how you start a fire in one of these wood stoves in a hot tent. If you guys have any questions, drop them in the comments here. Hit us up at www.seekoutside.com. info@seekoutside.com is the email address, and can answer any questions you have about starting a fire in a titanium stove in a hot tent.